Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 25 of Outlaw Star. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, Jean and company made it to the Galactic Ley Line with not only the K-Pirates, but also the McDougal brothers. And after a short space battle in which they ultimately decided, perhaps discretion is the better part of valor, they instead opted to navigate the maze that led to the ley line. Now, whatever the maze is, it's sort of unclear aside from it being a space anomaly, but through playing by the rules, for want of a better term, or by just sort of like cheating and cutting the line, all three groups have ended up at the ley line itself. And if we thought we were going to get any preliminary answers, that's not the case, because if anything, things have only gotten more and more weird. There seems to be an entity in charge of the ley line to a degree, and that entity has decided, hey, Melfina, why don't you come with me? So, things are very tenuous, naturally. There are three groups of people who are steadfastly opposed to one another, and two of them probably have some pretty nefarious designs for Melfina, who, at this point, still hasn't really gotten any answers, which was, in her mind, the whole purpose for this voyage. So, whether or not things will be answered remains to be seen, but the prognosis is looking good. So I guess we're cutting right to Melfina. And the interesting thing is that she's sort of being held prisoner. Or at least that's the impression I get. And the voice, belonging to the entity or whatever, is asking her, why have you returned? Which, that sort of puts me in mind of, end of Evangelion territory, with the seed of Adam and the seed of Lilith meeting up and rejoining when they really shouldn't be doing that. It's also interesting that this voice is telling people that there is but one path. And, this probably works out pretty well for Jean, because I feel like he wouldn't care too much for a maze. But the interesting thing is that seemingly everyone else is sort of stuck with one path, albeit apparently different paths. So I guess this sort of indicates to me that the ley line is testing people, each path that someone must take is specific to them and their temperament, and perhaps it's designed in a way that will try you personally, or test you, rather. So, I guess the question is, who's gonna rise to the challenge? I think it's fairly natural that Jean would, but the younger McDougal here, he's a very dangerous entity, I reckon. just because, he was never exactly playing with a full deck, but now, he's far more machine than man. He had already claimed that he and Melfina were sort of spiritually similar in that they were artificial, but now he's far more artificial than he was before, which leads me to believe that whatever tenuous grasp he had on reality is probably that much more tenuous. Now, at least Aisha is very optimistic about this whole thing, because she reckons there's still going to be treasure. Although, if I were here on the ley line, I would reckon by this point that, whatever we're going to get at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, it's probably not going to be currency, or something easily convertible into currency. We're not going to get a pot of gold. We're not going to get a treasure chest full of precious gemstones. I mean, at this point, I feel like the true treasure of the ley line is probably knowledge or something. Or at least that's the impression that I get. It's got to be something beyond merely material wealth. I guess I'm sort of also reminded of, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. All the traps and puzzles that led up to the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, you can't exactly ascribe a monetary value to it, but it is indeed highly valuable. I feel like that's probably what we're getting at here. Maybe it's not the Holy Grail. Maybe it's like a Fountain of Youth or something. Ooh, so it seems as though Jean and Suzuka have reached a breaking point, I guess. I honestly don't recall if Suzuka made it clear that she had it in for the K-Pirates, but seeing as how, the object of her contention is now confronting her, then it's only natural for her to stay behind and fight while Jean goes on. I do find it interesting that she had to sort of goad him into saying, hey, Melfina's waiting for you, hop to it. Because Jean, given the option, would stay and help fight, but, ooh. That's kind of a heavy thing to drop apropos of nothing. It's hey, you don't need to hate me just because I killed your entire family. I feel like as far as reasons for hating someone goes, that's a pretty good reason and a pretty understandable reason to boot. Maybe it wouldn't have been a bad thing to get a little bit more of that earlier on, but, we do with what we have, I guess I'm willing to accept it as long as Suzuka just beats the brakes off this guy. It is interesting that he has sort of taken on her appearance, which, I don't know, there might be a couple layers to that, if this guy, subsumes people and their identities and their skills and things like that, that would be kind of interesting, but I don't know, I guess he's not exactly wielding the same weapon as Aisha, or Suzuka rather, so there might be some difference in how he actually fights. Now, unfortunately for Jean, he's going to have to contend with an assassin of his own. And perhaps to his detriment, this assassin is perhaps a pretty woman. I say perhaps because she's a fair bit covered up, which, Jean would likely abhor, but I can't help but wonder if all these coverings are hiding, all sorts of horrible cybernetics, which, it's fairly frequently the case. Although I guess, seeing as how readily she starts casting Tau magic, then, perhaps she's a sorcerer rather than a cyborg. So, I'm wondering which caster shell Jean just used, if it was one of the ones that, drains life, because that's another little key point to remember. Those caster shells that Jean went through a lot of trouble to get, those are all so potent that it takes years off the wielder's life for using them, which, that's a pretty hefty price to pay. you don't think about it too much when you're young, about, how much time you have left and all that, but, like, that becomes an increasingly heavy weight. And I don't know, it gets to a point where, like, you really can't afford to gamble with years, But of course, Gene is a very headstrong, sort of reckless type of guy, so he's probably not considering it too much. And I do believe he's also pretty young, so it's probably just not even something he considers. And nevertheless, when it comes down to hunting down this mythical galactic treasure, maybe the cost of 1 year of life is worth it. So unfortunately for Gene, none of these caster shells seem to be working on this woman. Yeah, it really does seem to me that she's trying to goad him into using more and more of these shells, which, that does seem rather reckless to me. Ooh, that's a rather nifty change of pace. What do we have here? Oh, a little dinky little thing right there? Nope, it's a black hole. Enjoy spaghettification for all eternity. Black holes are really terrible, horrible things, man. Like, I'm really glad we don't have to deal with them on a daily basis, because, like, you basically just sort of, like, stretch infinitely for what you perceive to be an infinite amount of time. So, like, at some point things end, but, like, you'll never know. So, with that in mind, I'm really glad I'm not her. But I do find it interesting that she thought, oh, it's another rink-eating caster shell, only to be sucked in horrifically. Now, perhaps unfortunately for Melfina, good old Harry McDougal has arrived first. And he's saying, like, look, I'm here to save you, trying to play up the hero, but she denies him. And he's not freaking out yet, but okay, well, I guess any potential freakout has been forestalled by the appearance of the K-Pirates here. So, yeah, if anyone's gonna freak out, it's gonna be Harry at this guy, which is probably for the best. In the best possible outcome, they managed to get rid of each other. That's probably not going to happen. I feel like someone's gonna lose out here, but oh dear. To be using all sorts of firearms and ordnance like that, Harry's not remarkably efficacious. And that's also, really rather brutal that his limbs were just sort of, like, twisted like that. Like, that's gotta be really painful. And, especially the way it sprayed blood all over the place, that leads me to believe that, there is a fair deal of flesh still there. Which, that's not good, I like having my flesh nice and intact, I like it when my elbows bend the way they're supposed to and only the way they're supposed to. And, should something go wrong in that regard, like, it's just not good. Alright, so we're getting a little bit more information, potentially. Melfina is, in essence, a key. Whatever secret the ley line holds, she's the key to opening it. Which, oddly enough, that kind of puts me in mind of Ghostbusters, Like someone possessed by a ghost to become the key to opening, a gate that allows in a big monster that eventually takes the form of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Kind of underwhelming, but it is what it is. Ooh. Okay, so I guess this guy's got something of a history with Melfina. A little bit more, anyways. Now, this is deeply unfortunate, Gene's certainly taken his sweet time here if that K-Pirates made it into this sort of inner sanctum of the ley line. I guess it doesn't really bode well that the other members of the Outlaw Star's crew are still sort of holed up fighting their respective opponents. It really seems to me that Many of these people aren't gonna make it to Melfina in time to save the day. They might arrive a little too late. Perhaps Jean might arrive in the nick of time, as befits a hero, but Suzuka, she's fighting to the death here, and she was left behind fairly early on, so, I'm not exactly optimistic for her. And I guess it seems, even a bit worse than all that, just because she's being knocked around fairly handily. I'm sure this guy is a truly dangerous opponent and all that, but, maybe I spoke a little bit too soon. Suzuka seems to have bypassed whatever technique was really giving her the business, and now she's, smacked the guy. It's probably going to prove to be fatal for him, but, I guess it remains to be seen. So I guess Suzuka has emerged victorious, but the question is, can she make it in time? Will she be able to help? I mean, that's to say nothing of Aisha Clan, who also seems to be sort of locked in a stalemate, but, I'll take that back. I say locked into a stalemate, but she seems to have been, defeated handily. Or at least exhausted. But, whatever she's getting up to, we don't know what Jim's up to, because he was just sort of left to his own devices. Of all the members of the Outlaw Star's crew, I feel like Jim is the least adept at combat, aside from maybe Melfina, so, I don't know. If he runs into anyone, it's probably, really only in the cards for him to try and run away. So, the plot is thickened a little bit more. Understandably, the elder McDougal brother is, unhappy about what's happened to Harry, and therefore he's got a wee bit more animosity towards the pirate who did it, but, they were already sort of enemies as it were. I guess hopefully this sort of a slight is enough to, allow for a temporary truce with Jean Starwin should it come to it. Oh, so now Jean arrives. I guess it's a bit unfortunate that he and McDougal are just pointing guns at one another. They probably could form something of a truce if they, only just, thought about it and talked it out, but, I don't know. It seems like the elder McDougal brother is, well intent on fighting to the death. Oh dear. That's probably not a survivable fall for the elder McDougal brother. But I do find it interesting that Jean was so blasé about using that number 9 shell, especially considering the toll it has now taken on him. It's never a good thing if you're so utterly racked with pain that you are now remembering the past. In a weird sort of way, I'm reminded of Spy Family and recent seasons in which, Anya brings home bad grades and Lloyd collapses and remembers his childhood during the war. Perhaps that's a bit more extreme than this, but, what are you gonna do? It is interesting that all these dead people are sort of coming to talk to Jean. Whether or not the dead are actually returning to talk to him, who can say really with the galactic ley line? I feel under normal circumstances it's pretty easy to rule out. But it is telling that Hilda is there in addition to Jean's father. I feel like it isn't something that's been dramatically explored in the series, but the death of Hilda is really sort of a pivotal thing And, Jean was certainly affected by it. Oh, wow. So, to have been knocked on his rear by that number 9 shell in such a manner, like, that's not good, man. It's never a good thing when Jim has to sort of, like, wake you up holding what looks to be an EpiPen, you know? Like, it probably is, and it's probably some sort of, like, stimulant or something, or... Well, I guess I don't really know what it is, but, like, if you're relying on epinephrine to live, like, life's not exactly going real great, you know? I do find it interesting, however, that Jim was the next to arrive. I guess it makes sense, seeing as how he hadn't been waylaid by any enemies, and, he was able to just run undistracted, but it is telling that, despite all that, Jean's really just sort of relying him to hold down the fort here. Like, basically, get the others, get the ship ready, and sit tight and wait for me. It's unfortunate that he can't really come along into the depths of the ley line, but, I don't know, with such a bizarre space as the ley line, I feel like, you really don't want to bring any potential liabilities with you. And at least Jean can rely on himself, So, good old Dr. Khan is here. It's interesting that, whatever's going on, he can't bypass it. So, it seems to me that the pirates sort of like locked the door behind him. Yeah, this is a bit of a bind with the door locked behind them, essentially. Oh dear. Okay, so Harry is not dead. He has entered the ley line proper too, but, wow. So Harry is certainly in rough shape, which I guess lends credence to the idea that he is far more machine than man. And it's really only the machine parts that are keeping him up and cognizant. But, wow, that's not good. It is, perhaps nice that the dim lighting doesn't give us a full view of the ruin that now is his body. Although I suppose it is also mighty convenient of Harry to show up because, he seems to be somewhat able to do what Melfina can do. Which in this case is probably like, open up the pathway. Alright, so Harry seems to have had, not necessarily a change of heart, but like a willingness to do something beneficial with his last action. Rather than act out of anger or do something like that, he's just sort of using the last little bit of life he has to try and spring Melfina free and open up the ley line properly. I guess to his credit it worked. So the question is, now what? Because there are still pirates to deal with. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.